This is Unit 4B, Part 2. Now we're going to discuss the pancreas. The pancreas is a gland, acts as a gland. However, it is considered part of the digestive system. It's considered to be an accessory organ within the digestive system, but it is also part of the endocrine system in that it has endocrine tissue in it. In fact, there's two types of tissues. There's exocrine and endocrine tissue inside the pancreas. The exocrine tissue produces enzymes and secretes them out into the duodenum. But the endocrine part of the organ is located within these islands of cells scattered throughout the body of the organ, and these islands are called the islets of Langerhans, and they produce two different hormones. Alpha cells produce glucagon, and beta cells produce insulin. So both of these cells are found inside the islet, but they have different products. One is alpha cells produce glucagon and beta cells produce insulin. Both of these hormones are involved in carbohydrate metabolism. Glucagon is a polypeptide, a protein molecule. It has potent ability to increase glucose levels in the bloodstream. So that's called the hyperglycemic action, or it acts as a hyperglycemic agent. The main target for this hormone is the liver, and it will trigger two kinds of responses in the liver. One is it will increase the breakdown of glycogen, which is a storage form of glucose, and it'll increase the rate of breakdown of glycogen to individual glucose molecules. Glycogen, of course, is made up of many glucose molecules all strung together into a polymer, and the glucagon will trigger the breakdown of the glycogen, and that process is called glycogenolysis. Lysis of glycogen, glycogenolysis. The other thing that the other effect that glucagon has is that it will increase the rate of synthesis of new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. So new glucose is made from lactic acid or protein or lipid. And that process of creation of new glucose is called gluconeogenesis. So it upregulates both glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, resulting in the increased level of glucose released into the blood, to the blood plasma from the liver cells. The other product, insulin, is also a protein. It happens to have two amino acid chains that are linked together. It's first synthesized as a inactive molecule called proinsulin, and then it gets cut by enzymes to form active functional insulin. Insulin, of course, gets released when the glucose level in the bloodstream rises. So, and that's usually with eating, right? So if glucose levels rise in the bloodstream, then insulin will get released from the pancreas, from the beta cells in the islets of Langerhans, and it results in a lowering of blood glucose levels, because the effect of insulin on cells is that it will bind to insulin receptors on cells throughout the body, and then allow those cells to take up glucose into their cytoplasm. So by taking up glucose, that causes a drop in blood glucose levels. I'm not going to describe this last one to you, but essentially it has many, many activities in the body, in cells, in terms of their metabolism of carbohydrates. But the main effect, of course, is allowing glucose into the cells and upregulating the usage of that glucose in generating energy through biochemical pathways. So it'll upregulate a lot of those biochemical pathways. And this is essentially what I said. It binds to the receptor in the cell, allowing glucose to enter into a cell. And then once it's in, it will upregulate or trigger enzymatic activity that results in the breakdown of glucose for energy production. It will also increase the formation, if you have enough glucose, it'll increase formation in the liver of glycogen. So it stores away excess glucose in the form of glycogen. And it will also take excess glucose and store it away into fat. And that happens, of course, primarily in fat tissue. So glycogen formation is upregulated, and fat formation is upregulated with insulin if you have enough glucose around. But the main point of insulin is to allow glucose into cells and upregulate the cellular metabolic pathways that break down the glucose to form energy. And here you see a diagram that goes through that. You know, the trigger for you have to follow the color, the same color. So the trigger for glucagon release from the pancreas is a low blood sugar. If the sugar level or glucose level in the blood plasma drops below requirements of the body, then that triggers the pancreas to produce and release glucagon. And glucagon, of course, stimulates glycogen breakdown. Glycogen is in the liver, and the glycogen, I'll change color here, the glycogen breaks down to individual glucose molecules, and I don't know why they put the arrow here, but those glucose molecules go out into the bloodstream, thus raising the glucose level in the blood. The opposite effect occurs if there's a higher or high blood glucose level. That will trigger insulin release from the pancreas, and it's going this way. And insulin release allows cells, once it binds to the receptor, stimulates glucose uptake from cells into cells. So that will cause a lowering in the blood glucose level. It also stimulates glycogen formation and fat formation and adipose tissue glycogen formation in the liver. Okay, there is a disease called diabetes. It's actually diabetes mellitus, which is actually, unfortunately, fairly common in Western society, particularly. It is a result of insufficient insulin or too low activity of the insulin because there aren't enough receptors for insulin. So it's either abnormally low insulin level or abnormally low receptor level. Okay. I'm going to have trouble writing receptor here with this. So the two possible causes for diabetes mellitus is a lower insulin or lower insulin receptor. There are three cardinal signs of diabetes mellitus. They are as follows: polyuria, polydipsia, and polyphagia. Polyuria is excess urine output. Polydipsia is excess thirst, and polyphagia is excess eating or hunger. Those are three characteristic signs that go with onset of diabetes mellitus. Okay, so just to review what happens in diabetes or diabetes mellitus, you have a decrease because of either low insulin levels, which by the way is type 1 diabetes, or inadequate receptor levels, which is type 2 diabetes. You have a decreased ability to take up glucose and use glucose. Even though the glucose is there, so in the blood plasma, you have hyperglycemia, okay, because of the higher levels of glucose that can't be taken up. In fact, the high levels actually result in glucose spilling out in the urine, so you get glycosuria. The other thing you have is an increase in the liver. You have an increase in breakdown of glycogen. The body's, looking, it requires glucose, so you have glycogen being broken down, glycogenolysis, and you also have protein breaking down because it's getting used in gluconeogenesis, the formation of glucose from a non-carbohydrate source, in this case protein. You also have breakdown of fat, lipid, increased breakdown of lipid. Again, it gets converted and forms into glucose. And you have production of ketones. So there's an increase in ketone level. Basically, the end result is, the key features that you can pick up, signs or symptoms, include glucose in the urine, osmotic diuresis, which basically means increase in urination, so polyuria. You have ketones an increase in ketones in the urine, and there's other symptoms as well. The key signs and symptoms are polyuria, polydipsia, and polyphagia, as I said before. In the end, the increase in ketones causes the ketoacidosis that's characteristic of uncontrolled diabetes. I think I'll write that word out, ketoacidosis. The reason is you have, with the imbalance in appropriate carbohydrate metabolism, you have an increased level of ketones in the plasma and spills out in the urine. And ketones are acidic, so the increase in high levels of ketones in the plasma causes ketoacidosis. That's a characteristic of uncontrolled diabetes. Okay, let's move on to another set of organs that also have this mixed characteristic of exocrine and endocrine function. They are glands, but they also produce secretory products, and this is the gonads. In the female, the gonads are the ovaries, which are found in the abdominal pelvic cavity. These, in terms of their hormone function, produce estrogen and progesterone. They are responsible for these hormones are responsible for helping maturation of the reproductive organs, the appearance of secondary sexual characteristics such as breast development, also breast development, and cyclic changes in the uterine mucosa. On a monthly basis, the mucosa of the uterus builds up and then if pregnancy doesn't occur, it sloughs off with menstruation. In the male, the gonads are the testes. They're located in the scrotum, which is outside of the abdomen. It's an extra abdominal sac, and the testes produce testosterone. And again, testosterone, this is the main androgen or sex hormone in males. It's involved in initiation of maturation of the male reproductive organs, appearance of secondary sexual characteristics, sex drive in males and females, by the way, and it's necessary for sperm production in the male, obviously, and helps maintain the sexual organs in their functional state. We will, by the way, talk a lot more about the gonads in males and females when we do male and female reproduction. The other organ I'm going to talk about is the pineal gland. This is, if you recall, part of the epithalamus. It hangs down from the roof of the third ventricle in the brain. It is an endocrine organ which secretes a hormone called melatonin. And that melatonin is involved in the day-night rhythm or day-night cycles. It essentially is involved mainly in the proper establishment of rhythmic variations through the day. And the term for these rhythmic variations is called circadian rhythms. Really should have that on the slide. Circadian rhythms. Circadian. It's difficult to write with this. Rhythms or cycles. Your body varies in a when things are in a balanced state, then your body varies in a rhythmic pattern through the day, through the 24-hour period, in the body temperature and sleep and appetite, day-night cycling, that you get tired at a certain time of day, etc. Okay, in a lot of books, I think your textbook, and some people, they refer to the thymus, which is, I remind you, an organ that's on top of the heart, on anterior and on top of the heart, two-lobed, bilobed organ. They refer to this as an endocrine organ. It is not an endocrine organ. It is part of the immune system. It's an important, very important part of the immune system. Yes, it does produce some products that have hormone-like actions, but they are never exported out. They stay within the thymus. The main thing that the thymus does is it acts on T lymphocytes. So this is the site of maturation of T lymphocytes. The hormones that are produced, or the molecules that are produced, are for intrathymic development of those T cells. It is in fact considered properly, it is considered not an endocrine organ, but a primary lymphoid organ, because it's involved in the initial production and maturation of T lymphocytes. So it's part of the immune system. Now, there are other hormone-producing structures in the body. They are parts of, or cells. They form a smaller part of different tissues. For example, the heart does have glandular tissue in it. It does produce atrial natriuretic peptide. Remember, atrial natriuretic peptide is produced when blood pressure is high and there's stretching of the atrial walls. So there are cells in the walls in the walls of the atrium that can release atrial natriuretic peptide, and it acts to reduce blood pressure and blood volume by reducing blood sodium, and therefore water follows this sodium out. It has a natriuretic effect on the kidneys. It causes less reabsorption of sodium, and therefore you get more sodium and water being put out, and therefore a drop in blood volume, and therefore a drop in blood pressure. In the gastrointestinal tract, and I think we've spoken about this, we have endocrine cells that act to release hormones involved in the digestive process. We also have the placenta, and we'll talk more about it when we discuss pregnancy, but that also is capable of releasing hormones. So even though the main function of the heart, the gastrointestinal tract, and the placenta is not as an endocrine organ, they each do have endocrine function, partial endocrine function, in that they do produce important hormones. The heart, of course, pumps blood. Gastrointestinal tract helps process food that we eat, and the placenta helps to exchange in gas and nutrients and waste products. But also, each of them produce important hormones. In addition to those three, there's also the kidneys, which are capable of producing erythropoietin. And this erythropoietin hormone goes into the bloodstream, goes around until it binds to receptors found in the bone marrow, red bone marrow, where it acts on hemocytoblasts, the stem cells for all the blood cells. It binds to them and causes them to differentiate towards producing more red blood cells. So it's a driver of erythropoiesis. So you will produce more red cells if you have more erythropoietin produced in the kidney. The kidney essentially is monitoring the PO2 level, and if PO2 levels drop, then more erythropoietin is produced and released, and more red cells will mature. The stem cells will produce larger numbers of red blood cells. The skin also is capable of producing, or is involved in producing hormones, at least a precursor of vitamin D. I'm not so sure that would be considered a hormone, and the fat tissue, adipose tissue, releases a hormone called leptin. Leptin is involved in the sensation of fullness, or I'm not sure how to pronounce this, satiety. Okay, so that's feeling full after a meal. All right. I will talk very briefly here about some developmental characteristics in the developing embryo. Hormone-producing glands can arise from any of the three layers that are involved in embryonic development, 3 layers of tissues. The glands that are derived from the mesoderm layer are the ones that will produce steroid hormones. Endocrine glands in general operate throughout life. Some show changes with age, but others are unaffected by age. What you should actually understand also is that there are chemical compounds that have been, synthetic chemical compounds that have been produced, which have hormone-like activity and can alter hormone levels. So they can either act as hormones, they can disrupt hormone function, and these are can accumulate in the environment. And this became clear when people were finding, particularly fish with abnormal development, that fish that had not developed normally during the embryonic stage. And these pollutants are quite a wide variety of different molecules that are found as essentially um, pollutants in the environment. Some hormones, in fact, are vulnerable to the effects of the pollutants, and they will be altered or reduced in production. Or it's quite a complicated field. I'm not going to get into that, other than you should be aware of it. Okay, in terms of development with aging. In the female, you get significant changes with aging on the ovaries, and they eventually become unresponsive to gonadotropins released from the pituitary gland. And the overall female hormone production then declines, and eventually the ability to bear children, to ovulate, stops. And this is called menopause. With that kind of process occurring and deficiency in estrogen, there can be some associated problems, particularly the onset of osteoporosis, which is fairly common in women as they age. It can occur. Osteoporosis is a loss or falling out of calcium in the bones. So the strength of the bones, the density of the bones is weakened, is reduced, and that leads to things like more commonly hip fractures, things like that. Testosterone also diminishes with age, but the effect is not usually seen until a very advanced stage in terms of senescence or aging. And the last thing I want to talk about is just a few hormones that are reduced with age. Growth hormone levels decline, resulting in loss of muscle mass or muscle atrophy. With age, people start getting smaller muscle mass. It is possible with supplements to increase muscle growth, but I don't think that this is commonly done. I'm not sure. Thyroid hormone declines with age, and that results in a lower metabolic rate. And the parathyroid hormones, however, remain pretty constant, and therefore calcium ion levels are well maintained, usually in the blood plasma. They're so key to survival that PTH keeps being produced. PTH can have more of a bone demineralizing effect in women, and that's due to lack of estrogen. But it's lack of estrogen results in more PTH effects, more bone demineralization, and loss of calcium from the bones. And that's the end of Unit 4B, Part 2.